Okay. Thank you, Martin, and thank you all. You see that the sun has raised for the brave that traverses now to be here presentially. And I think we have a very interesting session. We had hard times during the pandemic, and we expected to be a little bit quiet after the pandemic, but in fact, we're seeing a rise of very known diseases in all countries. And this may have multifactorial causes. The climate change is impacting us. I'm from Spain, and you know what happens recently there. Floodings, movement of population, migration, and this kind of situation also fits a lot all that is related with vector-borne diseases, because they get together, they expand the diseases. So a possible cause. We also have, I think, changes in ourselves after the pandemic, how we deal with the infectious diseases, how we tolerate them. And we can see a rise in especially sexually transmitted diseases after, I imagine, the lockdowns. And also regarding our attitudes with vaccination. I guess you all see yesterday outbreaks of measles in Birmingham or other diseases that we're not expected to see. So we may have change also. And additionally, there's also changes in the microorganism itself. So we've seen a lot of causes that are now causing trouble from the epidemiologic point of view. And I think we have to somehow adapt ourselves to this new situation.
Yeah, and in order to highlight some of the aspects that are inside these multifactorial resurgence of the diseases, I think Jacobo has mentioned some of them. We have invited 3 speakers today, and I'm very delighted to introduce them to you now. We have our first speaker here on the end of the plenary, Nienke Beerlage-De Jong, who is an assistant professor from the University of Twente in the Netherlands. She's a health scientist with a strong focus on planetary health, and her research highlights or circles around the interface of human behavior, technology, and infectious diseases. And in this field, in her past work, she has worked on zoonotic diseases or other climate-influenced diseases, but also on antimicrobial stewardship. So we're very happy to have you here. And next to Nienke, here in the middle, we have Tomasz Sobierajski from the Socio-Medical Center at the University of Warsaw in Poland. He's a sociologist by background, but also the founder of the very interesting new subdiscipline of socio-vaccinology. And I believe this can also be a discipline that can add a lot and supplement a lot of the knowledge that we generate also as applied epidemiologists. So also a warm welcome to you, Tomasz.
Thank you. Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Maria Wessman, who is a medical epidemiologist with a focus on sexually transmitted infections and bloodborne diseases. And she's also the head of the division of STIs and bloodborne infections at the State and Serum Institute in Copenhagen, Denmark. So also happy to have you here. And before we start with our presentations, just a small remark. Martin has already said it in the beginning. In this session, we will take the Q&As after each speaker has given their presentation, and you're welcome to submit questions during the talk via the Guided 2024 app, but also after the talk, you can just raise your hand in the audience if you think of a question, and you can then ask them via the microphone. And yeah, Martin will try to cluster a bit the online questions for us, and then take, like you saw yesterday, also the most popular ones to be answered by our speakers. And with this, hand over to you.
Okay, so let's start with vector-borne diseases. So Nienke, please, the floor is yours.
Just checking that my name is not stuck on me. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining this session so early in the morning. Today, indeed, I will discuss the emergence of vector-borne diseases and some of the things that we can do about them from a socio-technical perspective. So I think I was going to introduce myself, but I think that was already really nicely done. So just to mention, I like to think in my research about how we can develop, implement, and evaluate digital health technologies for fields like One Health, AMR, and outbreak management. Now, for most of you, whoa, where do I point? There. Oh, yeah, no conflicts of interest. So for most of you, this is water under the tree, or under the bridge, right? But in case there are any non-native infectious disease-speaking people in the audience like me, what are vector-borne diseases? The WHO defines them as illnesses caused by pathogens such as parasites, viruses, and bacteria that are transmitted through vectors, such as mosquitoes, flies, ticks, but also snails. Examples include malaria, dengue, chikungunya, tick-borne encephalitis, and many more. Vector-borne diseases, or VBDs, are a global health priority, and with good reason. Sorry about that. 80% of the world's population is at risk of acquiring one or more VBDs. They account for 17% of the global burden of communicable diseases and claim over 700,000 years annually. Partly because antimicrobial resistance is sometimes hampering effective treatment. VBDs are preventable through protective measures very often, yet even let's add that vector control interventions have one of the highest returns on investment in public health. It really looks messed up. I'm sorry, I promise it was not looking like this when I made it. So, knowing that we can prevent them is often, so why are they still re-emerging or emerging? That's because of a complicated multifactorial whole. The first one being climate change. Over half of human infectious diseases have at some point increased because of a climate hazard. In a staple review by Moore et al., they have shown that actually the majority of these, is this in there? No. All of these are transmitted through vectors. So that's the vast majority. Land use and land cover changes also are major drivers of vector-borne disease re-emergence. They cause closer and more exposure between humans and wildlife and vectors, but also disrupt ecological balances. For example, by reducing predator populations that would usually control vector numbers. Additionally, agriculture and livestock farming affect 1/3 of the global land surface. And that, of course, has an impact through factors like irrigation and livestock proximity. Increased trade and travel, I don't think I even need to explain, has made it possible for diseases to travel across borders within hours, minutes. And urbanization worsens this as cities have higher population density, higher temperatures, and often inadequate waste management, creating ideal environments for vectors to flourish. All of these factors impact the life cycle, distribution, and also behavior of vectors, boosting transmission to immunologically naive population in areas where public health systems may not be optimally prepared. To make things even more interesting, from a socio-technical perspective, there are things that complicate matters further. I'll discuss 3 key areas: surveillance, communication, and attitudes and awareness. As we've heard more often in these past couple of days here, surveillance is the cornerstone of managing VBDs. Yet, underdiagnosis remains a problem. GPs indicate that they do not test for these diseases because they hardly encounter them. And that, of course, creates a cycle where a lack of testing leads to unawareness, and unawareness leads to even less testing, affecting our data. In addition, at least in the Netherlands, diagnostic tests are not always reimbursed. And because of that, especially people with a lower income may not always be inclined to get tested. Both of these have an impact on the accuracy of your surveillance data. Legal, ethical, financial, and technological challenge also impact your surveillance because they hinder data sharing across organizations and national borders. Challenges like confidentiality, liability, system interoperability, and lack of funding have to be addressed. That will be necessary to enable larger scale surveillance and more effective public health interventions. Finally, there is the challenge of balancing data aggregation for public health insight with data specificity to support local health interventions. We've been, in this ongoing project that we show here, we've also been playing around with that a little bit. We tried to see if we could get a grasp of what was going on in our own region, infection-wise, by aggregating data, lab-confirmed data, on a municipality level to also safeguard privacy. Rapid risk mapping using geohealth methods is still underused. To give an idea of how it could be used, on the left, is it left? Yes, that's very much left. Sorry. This is all floods that have happened since 2015. Now that, of course, can give an indication of high-risk areas for floodwater mosquitoes, for example. And on the right here is a TBE risk map that we created based on notification data. But even if we have the data available, it is often not really easily understandable by its end users. This is an example of a typical graph that is used to communicate antibiotic stewardship data. For experts, it's super clear. For me, not so much. With its double y-axis, the use of colors, which is not really inclusive for everyone. And here, we suggest another way of communicating the same data that may be less ambiguous. We've used these and other do's and don'ts for the design and the communication of data in a visual dictionary for antibiotic stewardship. Another example is this early prototype, and I repeat, early prototype of a tool that we are developing in collaboration with a medical microbiology lab called Lab MICTA, because we were trying to see what can we do to improve diagnostics testing in primary care for zoonotic infections. And what we learned through conversations with GPs was that they were more inclined to perform a test if they had recently encountered a case nearby. So what we're trying to do in this prototype is we map out when and where infections have occurred in the GP's close proximity, in addition to offering them information about most common and characteristic symptoms of the infection to support, hopefully, diagnostics. Now, it has been said before, and it will be addressed in more detail by the next speaker, so I'll only briefly mention this. Public's trust in science has declined over recent years, and this has been worsened by polarization and the spread of misinformation. Such a lack of trust is harmful because it's affiliated with a lack of adherence to public health preventive measures, but also a lack of healthcare use, potentially then contributing to the spread of VBDs. Furthermore, the COVID-19 pandemic was the first real infodemic that we experienced, which is what we have when there is too much information available, including misinformation and misleading information and false information during an outbreak of a disease. To counteract that, clear public health communication is pivotal. And a few colleagues and I experienced this firsthand when we, during the COVID-19 pandemic, were looking to find information that was needed to travel within Europe. Research nerds as we were, we don't just wonder what should we do, we make a systematic documental analysis of openly available public health information from public health authorities in the EU and Schengen area. The information that we needed, and let me remind you, this information that is aimed for the general public, is often captured in what looks more like legal text than clear instructions on what you should do. Fortunately, this issue is gaining more attention in research and also in practice, as I've seen here in the last couple of days. Like I mentioned before, another challenge in the field of vector-borne diseases is caused by antibiotic stewardship or resistance. In a recent review that we did on antibiotic prescribing in primary care, we found that actually uncertainty avoidance was one of the main drivers for physicians to prescribe antibiotics inappropriately. It is virtually impossible to take away that uncertainty. Every patient, every situation is different. So it is crucial that we support physicians in properly dealing and managing the uncertainty. And lastly, transdisciplinary collaboration that is needed to deal and manage VBDs is notoriously tricky, especially under the increased time pressure and public scrutiny that is happening during a disease outbreak. For example, a study by my colleague Fatjer Mulderij-Jansen indicated increased levels of limited levels of collaboration, leadership, oversight, and communication between stakeholders in Curaçao during recent VBD epidemics. Here too, technology can be of help to deal with this issue. These are screenshots of a serious game that we developed to create awareness of the importance of interdisciplinary collaboration during an outbreak of a zoonotic infection. And in this, the fun factor that we were able to deliver through serious game was instrumental in gaining willingness for people to participate, but also to have some common ground to talk about during in-session trainings, in-training sessions, on-site training sessions. Thank you very much. My brain was left in the snow as well. So, where does that leave us? First priority should be high quality data. Remember, garbage in, garbage out. This means that we have to support all aspects of diagnostics, reporting, and notification of VBDs. Next, leverage rapid risk mapping as a first step towards targeted interventions. This, by the way, this picture over here, I'm sorry for everyone there, it's also there. This picture is an example of such rapid risk mapping that was done by the Copernicus Emergency Management Service on the flooding in Valencia that Jacobo already mentioned. And that was online days within the event, so really quick. Third, ensure that the data that you have is clear and actionable for those who need to work with it. Different kinds of technologies can help in different ways of achieving this. And finally, but certainly not least, start building trusting relationships now. Not just with the general public, but also with your colleagues from other domains. It is really worth investing time in understanding their perspectives, their worries, their hesitations, and also their responsibilities. Because effective action during the next outbreak depends on it. Thank you. I promised there were more references there, but the animation doesn't work.
Thank you very much, Nienke. I think you touched several issues that we face when we try to control these kinds of diseases. So if you have to tailor maybe an intervention that touches all the possible causes, how you will design? What do you think is the best approach that we from public health can do in order to tackle these diseases?
I think the thing is with vector-borne diseases, from social sciences, it is what we would call a wicked problem, which means it is a problem that has many stakeholders involved. It doesn't have a clear stopping rule. There is no solution that is true or false. It is just a good idea or a bad idea. It also means that there is no single solution that would solve the problem. So it really requires this multifaceted approach on different levels that integrates different disciplines, but also different levels of dealing with things. For example, on an individual level, it is about creating engagement among the community. It's about building networks, strong networks with your colleagues from other domains. On a public health level, it is about doing the surveillance that I already mentioned, but also then monitoring what you actually do. So if you have the surveillance data, you're probably going to have to implement also an intervention. So how do you come to that intervention? What are the decisions that you've made and why did you make them? What are you doing in the intervention? So that we can then also evaluate how it worked and if it worked, so that we can draw lessons from it for next outbreaks. And then on an international, maybe even supranational level, public health professionals, I think, can be the advocates, the champions to make sure that we have a system where we have sustainable financial support, which is absolutely needed for this kind of issues.
Okay, thank you. I don't see any questions online. Maybe someone from the audience wants to raise her hand. No, neither. Oh, there's one that just come about the maps and symptoms that you showed on the screen that say it really looks interesting. Do you have any estimates of under ascertainment of vector-borne disease in your area?
Do I have, sorry, can you repeat it?
Yeah, the map you show, if you have estimated the under ascertainment, I'm sorry for my English, under diagnosis, I think I mean.
Yeah, that we do not. So we know, thank you, Martin, we know that we don't know, but we don't know what we don't know. So there's like this, we have to start somewhere. And the thing is that not all GPs are interested in this. They have enough on their plate. I'm not sure how it is in different countries, but in the Netherlands, their work pressure is through the roof. So you don't want to burden them then with extra work without knowing for sure that it's going to be worth their while. So now we've just started with the map and see if anyone is interested, if it's a GP with a specific interest in infectious disease, they're happy, more than willing, we're more than happy to let them use it, but we do not know what we don't know.
Okay. Another question, at what stage should the stakeholder engage or occur in the design of interventions? I mean, should we make our ideas based on our data analysis and then tell the stakeholders, or work with them with the intervention in order to be more effective?
As far as I'm concerned, and I am, well, I'm going to say biased, but it's research-driven biased. We have this framework called the CIRRUS roadmap that we use for the development, implementation, and evaluation of digital health interventions. And in it, we emphasize that it is so incredibly important to participate, to have your stakeholders, so not just end users, but also policymakers, funders, all stakeholders involved from the get-go. And I'm sure most of you have heard of citizen science. That is even involving them a step before that. So even before you start your research, before you start your development process, ask citizens what are the questions that are alive in the community? What are the questions that you would like to see answered? And also, how do you want to see them answered? How can we gather data from you? What would you be willing to do to help gather data? What kinds of data do you find are relevant for this? So as far as I'm concerned, you cannot start early enough.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Did say for me? Yep.
Yes. So from the socio-technical side, we go to the socio-medical perspective, and Tomasz will talk about post-pandemic socio-medical perspectives on vaccines.
Okay, thank you so much for the invitation. It's an honor to be here today and to speak to you in this audience and people watching at home. Nadine told me yesterday it's usually 3,000 people watching, so no pressure, Thomas. I feel much better now, Nadine, thank you. So, and thank you so much, especially to Piotr Kramasz, because he had a great courage to invite a sociologist for this exceptional conference. So let's sail by this tiny boat on the ocean of prevention health to the goal. I often describe myself as odd one out. That's because I combine two very different fields, sociology and medicine. At first, it might seem like a strange mix, and honestly, it can be. But from the public health perspective, it makes sense, because public health, like you know, works best when we combine together different fields, different disciplines to understand and improve people's health. The COVID-19 pandemic actually demonstrated just how necessary this perspective is. We had a highly effective tool, I mean, in the form of vaccines for rapidly spreading disease. But like you know, many people in actually every country were still very hesitant to take them. In my academic work, under the subfield I created, like Nadine said, I called social vaccinology. I focus on understanding how people react to disease prevention efforts, especially vaccines. During the pandemic, I was heavily involved in promoting vaccination. It often brought way of online hates, like you can imagine, but there were also lighter moments that showed humor can sometimes be the best medicine. For some, I was Aragorn, and for some, I was even Jesus Christ. So the pandemic strengthened my belief in the value of my work. Since then, I've made only 2 changes. The color of my hair, like you can notice, and the second, the most importantly, I've started interdisciplinary sociological research center at the University of Warsaw. Through this center, I lead research projects in public health with a particular focus on infectious diseases, antibiotic resistance, and chronic diseases. For today's event, I've prepared a little summary of my last 3 years of research on infectious diseases and vaccination. So like you see, it was a lot, so let me share an essence of it for the next few minutes. I conduct my research within what I called the social triad of public health, examining the attitudes, knowledge, and practices on 3 key groups. The first one, medical healthcare professionals, healthcare workers, doctors, I mean physicians, nurses, and pharmacists. The second, medical and students in medical and veterinary programs. And the third group, representative groups from general population or specific segments such as seniors or parents making vaccination decisions for their children. So let's dive in. First, let's talk about healthcare workers, healthcare professionals. We rely on them to promote vaccination and educate people about it. However, my studies showed there are big differences within this group when it comes to knowledge and attitudes about vaccine. For example, take the flu. In my study of healthcare workers in academic hospitals, 80% of doctors and only 42% of nurses said they believed flu vaccines worked. Only 6% of doctors, but 36% of nurses, 1 in 3, believed flu vaccines are ineffective. And it's even more because 30% of nurses believed that regularly taking vitamin C could prevent the flu more than vaccine, and 1 in 5 thought that regularly eating garlic was highly more effective than flu vaccine. Another surprising finding in our research, trust in vaccines among healthcare workers is much bigger, sometimes even double, in children hospitals compared to hospitals for adults. All our research confirms that the acceptance of vaccination among medical personnel is not widespread, and in groups such as nurses and paramedics, it's often at a relatively low level. Conclusion, education of medical personnel in the field on infectious diseases and vaccination must be more effective and long-lasting. Let's go to medical students. Medical students' knowledge about vaccines increases slightly during their studies, but their attitudes don't change. My studies showed that those who were pro-vaccine before entering medical school continue to vaccinate themselves, but those who didn't vaccinate before entering medical school are unlikely to change their habits even by their final years. Conclusion, knowledge alone is not sufficient to change beliefs. So we much better prepare students because they will be our vaccines ambassadors for the future. And what about patients? There are, like you can imagine, a lot of challenges, but focus on 2 key issues. First, patients still have very little knowledge about vaccines. During the COVID-19 pandemic, it might seem like everyone became a vaccine expert. Sadly, that's not true. Although the COVID-19 pandemic helped many people realize that vaccines for an adult are a thing. It's excellent foundation for us for further education about vaccine. The second, there is a still lack of communication between patients and doctors, physicians. For example, in my recent study from September this year on pneumococcal vaccines, only 10% of the general population reported that their doctor recommended this vaccine. This is even though most of them qualified for it, because 2/3 of them had chronic diseases. The most alarming data comes from individuals over 60, for whom pneumococcal vaccination is especially critical, like you know. Doctors recommended that vaccine to only 2% of those patients. 2%. Conclusion, it's always a good time to talk to patient about vaccine and recommend them. Answering for the question from the title of my presentation, have anything changed after pandemic? Actually, not too much, but I want to end on a positive note. I know, like Nienke said, that many healthcare workers and medical scientists think education patients about vaccines is nearly impossible because patients don't trust them. But there's some good news, actually, because the research from Ipsos conducted last year shows that in the most European countries, doctors and scientists were among only few professions that gain more trust. So we still have the power to influence and encourage patients to take preventive measures like vaccines, but there's one catch. We need to talk to them about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tomasz, for sharing this extremely interesting and I also think quite comprehensive study results and insights in all these different population groups that you studied and their attitudes towards vaccination. But just to build on what you said on these tips that you mentioned, could you build on this and tell us, do you have any tips for really public health professionals, kind of our sort, how they can respond to known infectious diseases, especially vaccine-preventable diseases, and how can they, with what key messages can they actually impact this behavioral change that you would wish to see?
Thank you. Actually, I've noticed during my research, I've noticed one thing, it's a lot of things, but one important thing, it's a vaccination gap between physicians and patients. Because when I ask physicians how many patients in your daily routine are anti-vaxxers, they usually said 50, 60, 70% of patients are anti-vaxxers. It's surprising for me, actually, and I asked them deeply, so describe these people, so what do they behave, and they said they are anti-vaxxers because they ask questions about vaccines, and they've got doubts about vaccines. So for them, in their eyes, patients who are pro-vaccine, it's the patient who has no questions about vaccines. But this is good that people have doubt about vaccines, have questions about vaccines, and our roles, I mean scientists and I mean physicians, healthcare workers, is to explain them what is going on about vaccines, because people don't know how it works, and it's very complicated for them. They think only about the injection and something like that, and they've heard something, they ask because someone said, they read someone in the social media, and there is a lot of information, like you said, there is info pandemic about vaccine especially. So this is the one side of the problem. And every time when I make a research on vaccination at the general population, I ask the question always, you are pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, or you don't know, you are between. So pro-vacciners, it's about 20–30% of population. It depends about vaccine, it depends about situation and the moment during the research. And anti-vacciners, it's only 2 to 5% of people who said, never ever I will take any vaccine. But we've got almost 70 people who don't know, who've got questions, who've got doubts. And of course, on the scale, some of them are to pro-vacciners and some of them are to anti-vacciners. But we have to care about these people, about this, who had the questions. So this is that gap. Physicians seemed it like 60 or 70% of anti-vacciners, but actually anti-vacciners, it's only 2 to 5% of general population. So it's the one thing. And the second thing, the very important, what I like to say and leave it with you, because when we are talking with my team and we are talking about communication, because a lot of people asking us, so how do we talk to patients about vaccines? So the first, like I said, we have to talk. Just talk every time. This is the first. And the second, usually we used to talk about vaccines like, maybe you will think about this vaccine, just have you ever considered to take these vaccines? No, we are not talking about vaccines like that. We talk directly. So when you've got the patient with chronic disease, so you talk to this patient, you have chronic disease, so you have to take this vaccine, or this vaccine. And for example, Miss Katrina, you work with a lot of people, so you have to take the flu vaccine. So directly, it's not the time for discussion with patients. Have you ever think about this vaccine? No, we are physicians, so we know better. We know better that this vaccine for this patient is the best, so we have to recommend this directly. Thank you.
Thank you. I think a very strong message that the dialogue is really, really the one thing that can make the difference in reaching also.
Hope so.
And also the dialogue between obviously quite controversial groups. So thank you for this. Martin, do we have any questions online? I think I saw one here.
Yes, thank you. We have a question for clarification. Was your study primarily Poland, or did it include other European countries?
No, it's in Poland, but it's actually it's on a general population, representative population. It's a huge country in Europe.
Sure.
So I think it will be similar in other countries. And when I work with scientists from other countries, it's similar, like in Poland.
So then we have two questions pointing in the same direction. One, you said very strikingly that knowledge alone does not change attitude. Why? And similar to that, do you know what the reasons are behind the skepticism from doctors and nurses that don't believe in vaccine?
Thank you for this question. It's a very good question, but it's very hard for another lecture. Actually, we can see when we are talking about knowledge. For example, I've taught only about medical students who in Poland. Actually, we don't have separate classes for vaccination and antibiotic resistance. So it's not good, but they've got some knowledge about vaccination during the studies, and physicians and nurses got that knowledge too, and still they've got problem to communicate about this to patient. Probably the knowledge we know. The problem with knowledge is that it's good when we connect it with practice. So when I've got the knowledge, but I don't know the experience of vaccination or experience vaccination myself or someone else, so it's hard to me to believe, because with vaccine it's that hard thing that we have to believe it works actually. So it's hard to believe for myself to vaccines, and hard to recommend it to other people.
Thank you. I think it's a really important clarification, because a vaccine is preventative.
Yep.
That's why you have to believe that the results.
It's very hard. That's why you need social sciences to understand.
Great. There are lots more questions for you, but in terms of time, I think we suggest we move on. But please have a look at them afterwards and see if you can reply.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Maria, the floor is yours. She's going to address now how these maybe these behavioral changes also has repercussion on how microorganism changes do what we do inside.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. So I'll try to do my best to talk about the future in terms of sexually transmitted infections. I have nothing to disclose. But in order to talk about the future, I think it's important to understand the past and the present. So on this Friday morning, let's start by talking about sex. People having sex always, otherwise our species wouldn't survive. There are ancient Greek, Roman, and Egyptian descriptions on sexually transmitted infections. And for example, 400 BC, Hippocrates described a condition that is thought to be gonorrhea. And in skeletal findings on a woman that is thought to have lived almost 10,000 years ago on the Yucatan Peninsula, skeletal findings show evidence of syphilis. and syphilis was present in Europe in medieval times with different theories on how it got there, so this is not new. And in the more recent past, we know that syphilis and gonorrhea were common infections. And as you all know, during the AIDS pandemic, people were afraid of their lives when having sex. So I will show you a graph of the gonorrhea notifications in Denmark from 1901 to 2023, with the number of notifications on the y-axis, showing that during the First and especially during Second World War, the numbers really rose, and also during the happy 60s and 70s, the number really rose, only to completely fall during the AIDS pandemic to almost zero, and then the last 20 years only to reappear again, first slowly in the population of men who have sex with men, and most recently really surging in both MSM population, but also the heterosexual population. And similarly, here you can see syphilis notifications in Denmark from the same time period. During the First and Second World War, there was really two large peaks, only to disappear completely during the AIDS pandemic. And now slowly, more slowly than gonorrhea, but though, has been risen again of cases, mainly in the population of men who have sex with men, but also recently also in the heterosexual population. So let's talk about the present. Well, since the AIDS pandemic, where after the introduction of antiretroviral medication against HIV, people have dropped the condom, as shown in this report from the WHO on your lower right, showing that adolescents are no longer using condoms. And all these reports from the ECDC show that STIs are surging in Europe, especially among young people. There was this rapid communication published earlier this year saying that the gonorrhea notifications in Europe are really surging, where Denmark was one of those countries as well. And numbers from the US CDC show that the number in syphilis are really surging, especially in congenital syphilis, which has been risen by several 100% the last few years. So there's a huge problem with syphilis, and especially congenital syphilis in the US, showing that it has really gotten into the population and also into vulnerable populations. So in Denmark, we had an increase of gonorrhea notifications in 2021 to 2022 by 50%. So we wanted to see if we could find out the reason of this sudden rise in the number of cases. So we looked in our freezers for isolates of gonococcal isolates, and we paired them with notifications with epidemiological information so that we knew mode of transmission, country of transmission, etc. We chose randomly every 30th isolate, ending up with 331 isolates that we performed whole genome sequencing in hopes of finding a reason to why this increase had happened. We found 3 distinct clades within these 330 isolates, showing that the first 2 especially had young women in them, mostly in the northwestern part of Denmark, also young men who have sex with women, and with ultimately no signs of antimicrobial resistance. Men who have sex with men, were represented in other clades, were a bit older and had much more antimicrobial resistance, especially against ciprofloxacin, up to 66%. So we found distinct increase in mostly young women and heterosexual men, and not with the MSM. So they were really separate from each other, the clades, and we had expected some form for bridging between the population, but found none. And the AMR in these clades, where the young heterosexual women and men had no AMR. So we hypothesize, are the new variants maybe more contagious than previous variants? Are they less symptomatic? Do they give less symptomatic disease than other variants? These are only speculations, and we plan to collect information on the presence and severity of symptoms and pair them with these clades to see if that can be an explanation. My colleagues are also on the way to constructing a single gene PCRs to identify clades without having to perform whole genome sequencing, because as you know, it can be really costly. And we want to explore when and how fast these clades began to spread. So we want to dig deeper into our freezers at the Serum Institute to see if we can go even further back in time to see if we can find out when these clades began to spread. And we also want to compare them with international samples to see if we can find other places in Europe or other countries internationally that have the same clades spreading in their countries. So let's look at the future. Is the future surveillance, represented by that white building where my office is situated? Well, yes, I think definitely we need to do surveillance. But we also have to remember that nobody cares if I know how many people got gonorrhea in Denmark last year. We have to use our numbers. We have to collaborate with other groups and other people. We, if possible, collaborate with whole genome sequencing teams to find out the reasons of why these infections are resurging, to find clades and different patterns in the spread. But also collaborate with NGOs, ministries of health to get the message out and be able to put in efforts there where they are needed. And what about prevention? Are condoms the future? Well, we know that condoms are efficient, right? But we also know that they're not being used. So it doesn't help that we shout condoms with capital letters at young people if they're not going to use them. So I think we have to be inventive with the campaigns and the way we address our key populations and our target populations. We have to know who we're talking to. Australia made an attempt of campaign in the earlier in this year that was named Before Play that was stressing the need for testing as well as safe sex. And the UK Parliament and House of Commons sent a report to the UK government earlier this year, stressing the need for a strategy on sexual health, as the UK numbers for STIs in young people have never been as high as they are right now. And they promised a sexual health strategy in 2019, but it was still not in place in 2024. So the prevention is really multifaceted and needs a strategy, but also needs a rethinking in the ways campaigns are made. The numbers on the left, lower corner, are represented by mathematical modeling, because I really do think that we can team up with mathematical modelers and see if we can prevent any changes in sexual behavior, and also with behavior and social scientists to see if we can predict sexual changes and see where prevention would be most efficient. And wastewater surveillance is also an area where several countries are looking into the possibility of detecting gonorrhea and chlamydia in wastewater surveillance, especially as a supplement in countries where the epidemiological surveillance isn't in place. The syringe represents the studies for vaccines. There are studies ongoing for chlamydia and gonorrhea vaccines. But in the meantime, the UK was the first country to recommend this year the meningococcal group B vaccination in risk groups, such as MSM, as it has shown that meningococcal group B vaccinations has a 40% cross protection against gonorrhea. So different measures are possible. And HIV PrEP has been shown very efficient to reduce the number of HIV infections in MSM, which is good in terms of reaching the Sustainable Development Goals in reducing or combating the HIV/AIDS pandemic by 2030. But what about the mandatory STI testings at each PrEP visit? Recently, Belgium stopped recommending the testing for asymptomatic gonorrhea and chlamydia because of the fear of antimicrobial resistance. And speaking of antimicrobial resistance, on this AMR Awareness Week and the possible dark future that looms ahead, the doxycycline used as post-exposure prophylaxis, studies have shown that it can be efficient in reducing the number of chlamydia and syphilis infection, and also to some degree gonorrhea infections. And the US CDC was the first country to recommend this year the use of doxycycline as PEP in certain risk groups such as MSM. But the UK has taken a clear stance against this due to this fear of AMR. So in the future, we need to really think about who to test, when to test, and to be vigilant, to be aware of the fact that there is an AMR risk, but also the risk of possible side effects or long-time effects of untreated infections, such as pelvic inflammatory disease, ectopial pregnancies, and infertility. And finally, AI. AI is here, it's here to stay. Apps are being developed as we speak on how to diagnose and detect STIs. And I think it's important that we stay tuned and really ahead and really follow the evolution, because it's happening, and not to stay behind. I think it's important that we understand that young people are going to use this and use it in a positive way, and also be aware that there are negative effects, and so that we don't stay behind on this. So in conclusion, people are having sex, surprise. But I do think we need to continue surveillance, but we need to be inventive. We need to be inventive with our technology, with the way we address young people, and we have to use our data to collaborate with other groups to understand these changes and why these resurgences in cases are happening. So thank you to my colleagues at the Sex Club at Serum Institute and other colleagues, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Maria. I was a little bit scared of congenital syphilis that if I'm, well. I think you raise an important question is every time we see a rise of the incidence in terms of transmission, we always think about, is it the microorganism that has changed, or maybe it's some external human factor that is driving this rise? So in your experience with both sides, what do you think as public health professionals should monitor in order to take the correct decisions?
Well, I really do think that it's important to detect these rises by doing epidemiological surveillance, but also to see if possible to perform whole genome sequencing to understand the features of the microorganisms, to see what patterns and what clusters are happening and what clades are coming up to see, and also to look into, do they give less symptoms? Do they attach more easily to the mucosa? Is there any change in the microorganisms that make them spread more easily?
Okay. So we have some questions from the audience. One is, as a general question, why do you think that now young people are less likely to use protection methods? Is it because there's a lower perception of the risk of what is maybe the online exposure to more porn information that has changed the way they think that sexual... What is your opinion about?
Well, I think it's a good question. I can only speculate, but I think people are not afraid of AIDS, which is a good thing, and we want people to have a good sexual health. And now the perception is that you can get an STI, and then you go to your doctor, you get some antibiotics, and it's over with. And that's obviously partly true, but they don't have the perception of the risk of AMR or the risk of untreated infections that can give secondary effects. And I don't think that risk perception is that present in young people.
Okay, and what about the use of drugs during sexual relations? That is something that also is on the rise, no?
Chemsex? Yeah, I think we know some, but I don't think we know a lot about it. And I think we need to understand in what context they're being used, and see if there's any way we can be inventive in making campaigns. As I said, I don't think we have to shout condoms, but we have to inform that maybe then testing would be, after events like that, could be an effective way to stop the chains of transmission.
What about some of the vaccination we have, especially papilloma? Do you think that vaccinated people can also think that they're somehow immune to have infections because they're vaccinated?
Yes, maybe. I think there were a lot of fears when introducing HIV PrEP that people would lose the risk perception and just have unprotected sex. But studies have shown, with some of my colleagues also from Serum Institute, that actually people started HIV PrEP before their risk behavior changed already before taking HIV PrEP, so they knew that they were in a risk group and therefore they took HIV PrEP. So I think it's really a multi-faceted issue, and yes, maybe people receiving the meningococcal group B vaccination think that they're completely protected against gonococci, which is not true, but I think we need to inform how the protection is, what are the risks even though you are vaccinated, and thereby people can make their own choices in their risk behavior.
Okay, last one. You think there can also be a change in behavior after the pandemic with all the anxiety, the lockdowns, the restrictions that we have, and then we're now like in a more happy period of time?
I think it's quite different from country to country. There are some European countries where there was a dip in STIs during the pandemic and then a rise, but in Denmark we actually didn't see a dip, so we just saw a steady rise and then this heavy rise. So I think it's, yes, probably in some countries that there has been an effect after the pandemic, but really I think people are having sex all the time.
Okay. So thank you very much. Over to you, Nadine.
Yeah, thank you as well. After we have heard now our three wonderful speakers talk a bit about enabling factors and challenges around resurgent diseases, we would really like to turn the floor over to you, the experts in the audience, and see what portfolio of resurgent diseases are we dealing with here in Europe and beyond. So we would ask you to scan the QR code, grab your phone, you know it from yesterday, and we will start asking you a first question, which is, are you seeing a resurgence of any of these diseases in your country? The list is not complete, as you can see it here on the screen. You will have the complete list on your device, and to answer it, we would just invite you to pick all the diseases where you see a resurgence, and they will come up then on the screen by frequency.
Okay.
So we'll give you a bit more time for this. Let's see how high the count goes. We have around 200 people at the moment voting. And here we see the first results. So of course there's still some changes occurring. So we basically see like measles being the highest where people see a resurgence, but also obviously whooping cough or pertussis. And can we scroll down on the list as well to see?
This is the
some.
list.
I cannot see them all.
We can
This
see
is the
over here.
complete list, right?
Ah, okay.
Is it possible to see the bottom of the list?
Here, I think it's better if you guys have it.
Okay.
QR.
Ah, yeah, you were. Okay, now you have it. Yeah, so we have, let's say, a top 4, which is measles, whooping cough, and then, I think fitting very well to Maria's talk, also gonorrhea and syphilis, but also some tuberculosis and diphtheria. And I think this is kind of the top 7, 8 that we're seeing here. And keeping these diseases, these results in mind, we would like you to answer a follow-up question for us, which is, and you've heard a lot of factors by our speakers that can contribute to the rise or the re-emergence of these diseases. And we would ask you, so if you had to choose one factor, what would that be of the factors that you heard, that you have in mind, that you heard our presenters talk about? And this answer is displayed in a word cloud, so I have to ask you to be really precise in your answers. 1 word, 2 words maximum, maybe even a hyphen, to display them quite neatly.
In sociology, we don't like open questions.
It's 1 word, open question.
We like hyphens, though, in Germany. So here you couldn't see. It's okay. So maybe we can display the first results of the first around 200. So I think Tomasz left a big impression with his talk. So vaccine hesitancy is definitely the biggest factor. Misinformation, behavior, climate change, but also education. COVID pandemic is mentioned again. Low vaccination coverage. And yeah, risk perception, which was also mentioned, I think, by our speakers. But yeah, the main one really being vaccine hesitancy. So thank you for participating in this poll. And over to you.
Yes, I think the results are not very surprising. If there is vaccine hesitancy, we will show or have more measles outbreak, more whooping cough outbreak, and it's a whole, commons of lack of knowledge, hesitancy, maybe not implication, like you said, in doctors because they doesn't have a lot of time, or maybe it's not priority. So I will start with you, Tomasz. What are your thoughts on these results from an expert audience?
Of course, like you said, it's not surprising, but when I was watching this, I was thinking about the authorities, because for the most, like I told, for the most people, the authorities are about vaccines are physicians, nurses. In Poland, for example, when we are talking about trust to medical professions, the nurses are on the top. Almost 92% of people trust to nurses, and like I told on my speech, nurses got a very low level about vaccines. So this is the different. But people usually, when we asking patients, where are you looking for information for vaccines, they answer at physicians. So, and the second answer is surprising in Poland, maybe in other countries the same. They asking pharmacists because they're closer to people. Because you have to wait for a line to get to the physician, and you've got the pharmacist, near your home. Because in Poland we've got a lot of pharmacists so it's even more than banks. So this is the one thing. And when I'm watching this, I just remember about when I'm talking about authorities, I just remember President of Poland, whom more than 10 million people voted for him. President of Poland said a few years ago, when someone asked him about flu vaccine, he said publicly, laughing, flu vaccine, I've never took, and I will never took any flu vaccine. It's stupid, actually. So, you know, we've got this kind of, it's our president. It's only 8 months, so we're counting. So it's something like that, you know. His father figure for a lot of people, so especially elder people. So when they heard something like this, it's, you know, it actually is dangerous for public health.
Okay, so a hard question. Do you think that when politicians or say that kind of affirmation, because we cannot think they're illiterate or at least they don't have technical advices, they're on purpose following that for getting the votes of people that already have these tendencies? Or what is your opinion? What does it happen that the president of Poland?
I'm not in the, when we are talking about Polish president, I'm not in this head, and I don't wanna be. But probably he said it. But it's a hard question. I think he said it because he thinks it's he thinks like this. Yeah. So it's ignorance. I don't want to talk about it. It's too much time for these guys.
Yeah.
No.
I don't want to put you in a compromise, sorry. So, Nienke, regarding also what we see, you have worked a lot in technology and maybe, you know, some tools that can help the physicians that maybe doesn't have enough time to talk about the patient about all these issues. So, what are your expert opinion on what tools or what methods? How can we incorporate the technology to address these issues?
Yeah, with the risk of being my own copy machine, I think there's no one answer to that question. I think that the word cloud to me, what it really showed is the breadth of these issues. Like it ranges from the president of the United States to war, to climate change, to behavior, knowledge. Everything was out on the word cloud. So it is so complex that you cannot fix it with technology alone. You cannot fix it with behavior alone. You cannot fix it with medical knowledge alone. So you really need to bring all these aspects together somehow for all these different pieces that we need to solve in this massive puzzle.
Okay, but as right now most people go on the internet, uses applications. A lot of information comes from that sites. Maybe something that we can also push to transmit correct information, to be reliable, to help somehow to arrive to better information?
Well, I think the information is out there. The information is correct. It's now more a matter of how do we get the information to the people that need to hear about it in a way that actually appeals to them and fits their needs. So it's more about really thinking, how can we reach the right audience in the right manner, at the right time, with the right message that fits their questions. So it's not so much about the content of the information, more how do we get it across.
Okay, Maria, now you have seen, no, that gonorrhea, chlamydia, etc., is not only one country problem, and I think that this is a very hard situation, because how can you tell the people to stop, or maybe to change really their sexual behavior? So how do you address, or how do you think we can address this issue? Because I think it's one of the hardest one.
The million-dollar question, yes. Well, I don't have the answer to that, but I think I don't know if we can change the behavior, but we maybe can change the knowledge and the risk perception, and to also stress that if you've been in a situation that has been where you're at risk of having contracted an STI, then get tested and to stop the chains. But also it's so important to remember the fact that several countries are also moving away from testing asymptomatic, also due to this AMR risk. So we're really trying to navigate in this field to the best way to communicate and the best way to make people aware of which risks they're taking and how to best test and treat.
Okay. The last one. Do you think that maybe we have so simplified the circuits and the treatment? I mean, it's really easy to have a sexual transmitted disease, have a penicillin injection, go home and start again. Maybe it's also a counter, I mean, something that goes against what we want to do in terms of prevention, because we're so good at treating that maybe, I don't know, what do you think about it?
I don't think we should make it more complicated for people to get treated. We want people to have a good sexual health and not be afraid when they're having sex, as it was the case 20, 30, 40 years ago. But I really think that it's our job to find the reasons to why these infections are surging and to really find a good way to communicate and not just have our old campaign saying just take a condom. So I think really we have to rethink of the way we communicate.
Okay. So.
Yeah, thank you for your comments on our audience's results. And I think with this we have reached the end of our last plenary session of ESCAIDE 2024, and I will try to summarize this big portfolio and potpourri of ideas and perspectives that we have gotten in this session, and think about, so what can we take home? What have we learned from this plenary session? I think we have gotten a good reiteration about how climate change and population movement can influence the occurrence of known diseases. We have gotten some hints on what technical applications can be useful to detect the rise of these diseases early, for example, by risk mapping or by reducing the under-ascertainment of certain diseases, but also in relation to how people can best learn about diseases and shape their attitudes towards diseases. We have learned that open dialogue and combining knowledge with practice might actually be key with impacting the behavior of our population. And we have also learned about population-targeted campaigns, especially in the area of STIs, that can really help to reach the right people with the right messages and really addressing like the right worries of this population. And I think last but not least, I think one important take-home message is also that it is really crucial to combine disciplines and to exchange among disciplines on these issues to combat this resurgence of the known infectious diseases. And also in order to hopefully, and I think this closes the circle quite well to our opening speech of the ECDC director, that we can hopefully, with this food for thought, also try to gain really back the trust of our population. And I think with this, let's give a last round of applause to our speakers. Thank you very much in the audience, and enjoy the last hours.